Well, thank you again to the organizers and the hosts for inviting us, and to the overall PI of the study, Dr. Anthony Mato, and all my co-authors for allowing me to present on their behalf. These are my disclosures. The study was sponsored by TG Therapeutics. Despite the overwhelming success of tyrosine kinase inhibitors that target the B-cell receptor signaling in CLL, we know over 20% of patients will develop intolerance. However, most of these patients are able to be successfully retreated with other kinase inhibitors, particularly if they have non-overlapping toxicity. Umbralisib, as nicely overviewed in the wonderful talks by Drs. O'Brien, Davids, and Bird this morning, is a novel next-generation PI3 kinase delta inhibitor that appears to have a favorable safety profile, particularly with less immune-related toxicities. And this thereby was the rationale for the design of this phase 2 multi-center study looking at single-agent umbralisib in patients previously intolerant to kinase inhibitors. The primary endpoint here was progression-free survival, but in this intolerant patient population, importantly, we also wanted to look at markers of safety and the ability to maintain on switching in these intolerant patients. The primary baseline characteristics of the 51 patients are demonstrated here. Patients were not required to have measurable disease at the time of entry, however, 36 did. And as you see, this is a higher risk patient population with almost a quarter of patients having TP53 aberrations, either deletion 17p or TP53 mutation. And then, of course, by required at study entry, all had prior kinase inhibitors, with the majority previously treated with ibrutinib. As Dr. Bird mentioned this morning, many patients that are intolerant to inhibitor can come off of drug if they have favorable disease or in remission. However, as you'll see here, the median time from off of prior inhibitor to treatment on this trial was only 3 months. This is the primary endpoint of progression-free survival, which has now been met at an estimated 23.5 months. But importantly, again, for a patient population that were all intolerant to have study entry, almost 60% of these patients have been able to be maintained on umbralisib. Importantly, as I stated, is the safety profile. And as you'll see at the chart, the majority of the toxicities and adverse events observed on this study were grade 1 and 2. Only 4 patients had emergence of an adverse event that had led to their prior kinase inhibitor intolerance, but most of these were of lesser grade, and in those patients were able to be maintained, with only 1 patient discontinued for rash, which was prior observed on ibrutinib as well. In adverse events of particular interest in the treatment with PI3 kinase delta inhibitors, only 1 patient had an event of colitis. But again, this patient with interruption of therapy and dose reduction was successfully rechallenged and importantly derived benefit and obtained a complete response. 6 patients, or 12% of patients, did discontinue umbralisib due to an umbralisib-related adverse event, as listed here. However, again, of these 12%, 100% of them came off prior kinase inhibitor due to intolerance, again, just highlighting in this patient population the importance of being able to switch to another inhibitor. So to summarize, again, in this high-risk either relapsed or refractory to prior kinase inhibitor with intolerance, umbralisib demonstrated a very favorable safety profile, with 100% of these patients previously intolerant to BTK or PI3 kinase delta inhibitor. Only 1 patient discontinued after going on this study due to a recurrent AE that was previously observed with their prior kinase inhibitor, and only 12% of patients had to discontinue due to the umbralisib AE. And with this, and being able to maintain patients on therapy, the primary endpoint was met with a progression-free survival in this high-risk patient population of nearly 23.5 months. And of the patients with measurable disease, almost all of them had measurable reduction in their baseline lymphadenopathy. So I'd like to conclude by acknowledging, of course, all the patients and families and the support of this trial, as well as all the participating centers that made this possible, as we, again, search for better treatments to be able to manage all of our patients with CLL. Thank you, and for additional details, I'll reference our poster abstract.